are back. You're listening to You Would Think, the Philadelphia Flyers podcast. I'm your host, Kyle Collington, and joining me today, the one and only Mr. Kevin Durso. How are you, buddy?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you?
I'm doing all right. First 2-week break of our new off-season schedule. I just wanted to mention that off the top. Make sure to subscribe to our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Got to do it early, right? Get the engagement.
Yes, we do.
All right, so diving right in. We don't really have a ton of Flyers news to talk about today. We'll talk about the draft lottery results in a little bit. A lot of today's show is going to be about the NHL playoffs, but we are going to start with a pretty significant piece of, I'll call it Flyers adjacent news. It's something the Flyers could be involved in.
Certainly.
Right. Recently, I don't remember the exact day, but it was about a week ago now, a surprising story came out, and it was the fact that the New York Islanders were firing Barry Trotz.
Right.
And so Barry Trotz hits the free agency market, and immediately Philadelphia's name comes up. Right? I said it in our group chat. If Chuck Fletcher's not on the phone with Barry Trotz or his representation, by the end of the day, he needs to be fired.
Right. Now, I will start by saying pretty quickly that day, I think Pierre LeBrun had the report that he's Barry Trotz is taking time to contemplate the future,
right.
Whether he wants. There's a lot of speculation that he wants to be a
translation. He's going to wait and see if anybody else fires their coach, so he has as many options as possible.
But there's been speculation that he may want to be, maybe an executive instead of a coach per se, and
okay.
where things go. I will say to this point, he's going to be turning 60.
Yeah, he's been a remarkably successful coach. He's achieved everything there is to achieve in the sport.
And he's been in the league for a long time, obviously.
Right.
I'm going to go through all that because we're going to have to define it anyway to, just to kind of break down the possibility of if he's a fit for this team because, that kind of stuff and,
sure,
all that. So the reason that he even comes up at all is because of the fact that at this given moment, today, there are only 4 teams that truly have a coaching vacancy. Now, one of them being the team that just let him go, who is not in play, obviously.
Right.
That's the one team that should not be contacting him because of the fact that you just moved on from him. You had him, you moved on. There's no chance he's going back. Okay. So the other 3 are Philadelphia, Detroit, and Winnipeg at the moment. There are interims in place in various locations, but kind of, and not to segue too far to the playoff stuff. There's 2 teams that have interim head coaches that are also now going to be part of the second round that we're going to discuss. I highly doubt that those teams are going to be looking for another coach's services.
Just out of curiosity, and we'll talk about this more in our playoff breakdown later. Yes or no answer, one word, we can move on.
Sure.
Does Toronto have a coaching vacancy within the next 2 weeks or so?
Do I have to answer this now, or I wanted to save this until the playoffs?
No breakdown, just a yes or no, and we'll touch on it later.
I'm not giving you a straight yes or no answer, but here's the answer I will give you.
Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Is that fair?
Absolutely.
I'm not going to definitively say yes, it's going to happen. I will say I think there's a strong possibility that is the biggest change that they could make in the immediate.
I agree, and we'll touch on that a little bit later on. Like I mentioned, probably the back half of the show is going to be all playoff stuff.
And if that's the case, since we're already on the subject, because you already mentioned the team that we're talking about, if you really want to know the person who probably wants that job more, he's not technically a free agent yet, but he could be, if you've heard from the speculation. It's Bruce Boudreau.
I've heard that Bruce Boudreau has made it known that he would like to return. I believe they have firmed that up that he's going to be returning this year.
Certainly, but the possibility, there's all sorts of possibilities, and something could. The other thing that kind of has to come into play with this is until the Toronto job is truly vacant, then it's not a possibility anyway. So all of a sudden, what you think is for sure and certain, meaning, oh yeah, he's going to return to Vancouver because it was a 2-year contract. He's already locked up for it. Why would anything change? Well, the Toronto job may be available tomorrow and wasn't available yesterday.
And that's one of those things.
That happens, you know? I mean, it's as simple as that. So I'm just telling you, I've heard that name come up when it came to Toronto specifically.
Okay.
I can tell you right now that for Barry Trotz, if we're talking logistically, Winnipeg is a natural fit.
Well, and I was just about to mention, in a similar way that Bruce Boudreau may have some pre-existing reasons to want to coach in Toronto, Barry Trotz is a Manitoba boy. There's reason to believe he may want to go spend some time as a head coach of the Winnipeg Jets, given personal life. And, if that's where Barry Trotz ends up, and that's why Barry Trotz ends up there, can't really fault the guy, right? It's the same reason I'm not going to give Claude Giroux a hard time if he wants to go sign in Ottawa for a couple of years. I'm never going to give somebody a hard time for wanting to go home.
Right.
That being said, please come to Philadelphia, Barry.
All right, here's the whole thing in a nutshell for me. Because when this, first of all, and you kind of touched on it already, because you called it, as you mentioned that it was a surprising announcement.
Yeah, it caught me off guard.
Because none of it made sense in reality. The Islanders missed the playoffs by 16 points.
Oh, right.
They also didn't start the season with any sort of balance between home and away.
And their first home game was something like November 18th when the season started in mid-October.
Because the building wasn't ready.
Yep.
So that was the first part of the problem.
Through no fault of the boys on the ice.
So you got that part, that aspect of it. Then you've got midway through the year, COVID hit the team. They had to play through it for part of it, so they're playing with half of a roster.
And it's pretty well accepted throughout the league that they got the worst of it in terms of cases versus games canceled.
Oh, yes, absolutely. And then when they did finally start, they canceled that 2-week stretch. They started canceling some of the games and moving them down the line. Well, now the Islanders had so many games to make up later on that they were now in even a more condensed schedule than they were before, which good luck coming back from that when you already were off on the wrong foot, so to speak.
Right.
Like, there's a lot of, this, if there was any year, like, we talked about this when we talked about the Flyers end of year media stuff and what Chuck Fletcher said and all that stuff, right? You don't want to hear excuses.
Right.
If there was ever a team in a year to put the 2 and 2 together and say, listen, you can rest on excuses, the Islanders had it.
Right. In the 21 season, it's weird calling a season with just 1 year, but in the 21 season, you had the Dallas Stars, right? And they kind of had some similar COVID issues, and then they had the whole Texas winter storm, and the grid was frozen, and blah, blah, blah. They got a little bit of a pass last year kind of from the hockey community.
Right.
And I think from a lot of people in the hockey community, the Islanders were going to be given a similar pass this year. And it turns out Lou Lamoriello doesn't particularly think that way. And I don't get it, because the 2 previous years, you go to the Eastern Conference Finals. Mm-hmm. Like, I know the goal is winning the Cup, and he ultimately failed to do that during his tenure on Long Island. But he made you relevant again.
So there's 2 things for me with what you're saying. Because number one, great point bringing up Dallas, because if you look at where Dallas is right now, why wouldn't you use that as a point of reference and say, listen, chalk it up as a bad year.
Count on the bounce back
the next year with a lot of the same players and a lot of the same talent.
Right. Matt Barzal's not getting worse.
Right. And then on top of that, what you're talking about with, you're talking about, they didn't achieve the ultimate goal. Right?
Right.
Well, gee, you know what? I don't really fault you for running into the reigning back-to-back defending champs.
Both times.
And coming up 2 games and 1 game short. The game 6 that they lost was in overtime, and the game 7 was a 1-0 final, I believe. Or 1-0.
Yeah, where Andrei Vasilevsky played.
Right, stands on his head and doesn't give you anything.
Absurd hockey. That's a theme we'll touch on again later, by the way. Andrei Vasilevsky standing on his head in a game 7.
Right, but isn't that exactly the point that, like, geez, I'm really sorry you didn't win a game 7 against a team that went on to win the Stanley Cup and has been notably, loaded with talent and capable of getting that done.
The best team of the Cap era. Let's just say it. You've gone up against the single best team of the Cap era, and that includes the 2008 Detroit Red Wings. That includes the 2009 Pittsburgh Penguins. That includes,
there's 2 things. No, there's 2 things for me. They are probably, yes, the best. Talent-wise, they're the best team of the Cap era. I agree with that.
Okay.
They are also the most strategic with the cap that I think I've ever seen in terms of how they navigate it according to what's legal.
Right.
Right. Like I said this last year when they won, and everybody won, and Kucherov said what he said and brought up the 18 million thing, whatever. And it's like, listen, don't hate the player, hate the game.
Yep.
The game says you can do that. And guess what? A lot of the funny part is how many teams tried. So to speak, not tried completely for an entire season.
Vegas tanked their season trying to do it.
Vegas had somebody on LTIR all year. And
Vegas did not ice a healthy roster the entire season and missed the playoffs by what? 2 points?
It might have been a little more than that by the end, but it was close.
Oh, sure, but down the stretch, they're playing games where every point matters.
Right,
and it's one of those things. If you got your lineup the whole season, maybe you win an extra game. Maybe you get those 2 points. Right. If Mark Stone doesn't get surgery or pushes it off for a week or like whatever you want to call it,
right?
It's tough to do what Tampa did.
It's tough to do what they did. It's tough to do what they're doing right now, which we'll get into. Like, it's an incredibly impressive team, no question about it.
After the first round, I'm picking them to win. They're done. 3-peat.
Okay. Well, we're going to get into where we are with all of this stuff.
Yep.
To me, when it comes to Trotz, and because we got to get back, let's get it back to that
absolutely.
A little bit. A lot of it goes against everything I kind of have said all along, which was, and I think we talked about this when Alain Vigneault was fired to begin with, when they were going with an interim, when we were wondering where they go from there, all that type of stuff. The last thing I think, there's a part of me that goes, the last thing I think that they need is a coach that brings expectations in terms of look at the longevity of winning. Like the team's employed, and I think I actually wrote this, they've employed 5 of the top 15 coaches all time in wins at different points in franchise history, none of which are the one that actually won a Stanley Cup for the Flyers.
Right.
They've won cups for other teams. Mike Keenan's won a cup for other teams. Peter Laviolette won a cup in Carolina, that kind of thing. So you got Keenan was with the Rangers. Lavi was with Carolina. When he won. Yep. Vigneault has gotten 2 different teams to a cup final, just never won it. You're talking about, and who else was I thinking of in this group? Pat Quinn is the other one. And look, you can also sit there and look at certain ones of that grouping and go, with the Flyers, they got on the cusp. Keenan teams made the cup final, and a Pat Quinn team made the cup final. A Peter Laviolette team made the cup final. Ken Hitchcock's the other one who I'm thinking of too. And Hitchcock did win a Stanley Cup with Dallas, and didn't make a cup final with the Flyers, but came darn close.
Did.
Why does everything come back to the Tampa Bay Lightning in this episode? It's all coming back to Tampa.
That series still hurts, and I have a little bit of a
in 04.
I have a little bit of a bone to pick with the city of Tampa Bay just because of the year 2004. Because
I hear you there.
Tell me you don't see Joe Juravicius running down the sideline. Come on now.
Oh, come on, of course.
Right.
But
Barry Trotz.
Okay, so what I was trying to get at is that because Barry Trotz is 3rd all time in coaching wins. It's the last thing that the team probably needs is a guy, and again, a Stanley Cup winner in Washington. It's the last thing you need is to bring in the guy who ranks 3rd all time in wins. And not only that, but I do want to point out that before his name even hits the free agent market in that sense, there are others who are pretty much part of that list in terms of, I think they're either in the top 15 or dangerously close to the top 15 in wins that are just out there and available in terms of, we've heard John Tortorella's name already. We've heard, or not heard, but the other names that you can go down the list and go, they've been there for the taking for how long, right? Claude Julien's been on that list. Mike Babcock, Joel Quenneville, for whoever wants to take that jump, which by the way, totally wouldn't do it if I'm the Flyers, because the last thing you need is more bad PR than you already got this season. But
might as well trade for Slava Voynov.
But somebody's probably going to do it at some point. It's coming.
Absolutely.
Someone's going to be the team that goes, we're going to try with this and get him reinstated and all that stuff. But the point is that it's still.
I don't know if I'd be surprised if Lou Lamoriello was the one doing that.
There's some. I'm trying to think of who else could eventually fit in.
Come on, You're in Long Island. You got the mafia running around. You can clear that. You can clear that red tape real easy. Come on.
I mean, there's a lot of possibilities. We know this. There's a lot of possibilities that exist. But either way,
I think it's worth noting. Getting back on Barry Trotz here, on one of the more recent 32 Thoughts podcasts, something that we've mentioned a lot here on the show. They're putting out a lot of episodes, so I don't know exactly which episode it was, but it was the episode right after Trotz got fired.
Right.
And Elliot Friedman suggested that there is a strong possibility that the Philadelphia Flyers, quote, back up the Brinks truck.
Right.
And now, again, obviously it comes down to Barry Trotz, and if he thinks that this roster has what it takes to win, and if he wants to go home to Winnipeg, if he wants to go move into the front office, even further up the management chain somewhere, it's kind of up to him at that point. But we've talked about it a lot here. It certainly seems like the Philadelphia Flyers are going to be willing to, write that blank check that we heard so much about.
They should be, because first of all, it's organizational malpractice if you don't look at a coach that's available like that and not make the phone call.
I agree.
That's just wrong. If you don't even bother to make the attempt,
you're not doing your due diligence.
Right. Now, if you make the attempt and the coach says, yeah, no thanks, all right, then look, that's the risk you take. If Barry Trotz wants to go, you got to respect the fact that if Barry Trotz wants to kind of take the fast route to, winning in some way, it's probably not in Philadelphia, and okay, fine. He'll probably,
quite frankly, I don't think it's in Winnipeg either, but
it's closer in Winnipeg than it is in Philadelphia, and I would, to be honest,
Detroit might be the best bet.
Detroit is not a
talent.
bad fit either, because they do have young talent. Correct.
Man, they sure do. Do you want Barry Trotz coaching Mo Seider? Hello.
The only thing I will say for Winnipeg, and this is something that is a basis for a lot of what gets said about Barry Trotz. Winnipeg definitely has an elite goaltender. That's
fair.
Always kind of a key aspect of a Barry Trotz team.
That is true.
He's
found an incredible way to make good goaltenders look elite. What's he going to do with Connor Hellebuck, a guy who's already elite?
Well, then it should just keep going.
Yep.
And I know what you're talking about. And in fairness to him, in fairness to Barry Trotz in this case, when he starts coaching in Nashville and it's literally day one, okay, you don't know what you've got yet. So there's a few years before the first player worthy of his jersey getting retired by the franchise steps into place, and you go, look at the goaltender they have here. Look at this guy, Pekka Rinne. And that changes the game, right? When he went to Washington, you had a young budding goaltender in Braden Holtby, who he took to the next level at that point, at that particular time. For those 4 years that Barry Trotz was the coach, you didn't have any questions about who the goaltender was. In
Braden Holtby was incredible.
Right. Yep. And then, I get what you're saying when it comes to kind of it with the Islanders, because, sure, Semyon Varlamov was a good goaltender. I don't know. I would not put him in the elite category. And he turned him into a goaltender who was putting up elite level numbers. Sure. Or he at least created a system and instilled a system that led to elite level numbers for his goaltender. Then you also get the embarrassment of riches to an extent where every team, so many teams, not every team, but so many teams seem to have a young goaltender who is going to be part of this next wave of very popular all-star level goaltenders. And Ilya Sorokin was part of that deal. And, let's put this way. Thomas Greiss can thank Barry Trotz for the couple of years before Sorokin really established himself.
So can Robin Lehner, by the way.
Yeah, Robin Lehner, too, for getting
Robin Lehner. You forget, Robin Lehner had his breakout season on the island. Because Barry Trotz has made Robin Lehner a lot of money.
Well, because when Trotz took over, Varlamov was still in Colorado, I believe.
Yep.
And then, look, everything starts to shift around, and they ended up with that grouping. We know, and this is the thing, we know the grouping that it kind of became because of the fact that, he basically Trotz had the Varlamov Sorokin combination for the last 2 seasons. The year before that, Greiss was the 1A. I mean, for more than half of the season, I'm talking in an 82 game year, which, yeah, I get it. They didn't really have 82 for a couple of these, I know, but
fair.
It was pretty much an equal, Varlamov gets one, Sorokin gets the other. Or Varlamov gets one and Greiss gets it. Like
he's a big workload management guy.
He is. And that could certainly come in handy in any city if he's got two. Like, depends on who it is, but it could come in handy no matter who you're talking about, right? Like,
I think it's still Laurent Brossoit backing up Hellebuck up in Winnipeg. I'm sure he did a little fist bump because Connor Hellebuck's a 65 start kind of guy.
Right, but you have to ask yourself, and this is kind of another piece of news that we can just kind of squeeze in here when it comes to the Flyers thing, because of the fact that you got to ask yourself, it's Carter Hart and because it could be Felix Sandstrom or it could be, it could be Ivan Fedotov.
It could be Ivan Fedotov. That is a name that we saw pop up since our last show.
Right. And here's the thing. They got the contract done.
I think he'll start in Lehigh Valley.
Right. Well, but the assumption with the contract being done is there's going to be no issues getting him over here.
Right.
Which means that
which is generally a pretty big assumption, let's be honest.
It can be. Right now, it's for where he was playing. It's a massive assumption. But I don't feel like you would state in your press conference at the end of the year, it's pretty much going to happen in the next few days, and he should be able to compete for the backup job right away. No, you don't say that, and then two, you don't actually have the contract done.
Right, you're speaking pretty confidently.
Right.
Well, let's not necessarily assume that it's done, because do you really trust anything this organization says?
Not like to a deep level.
Would it really surprise you if they were just overly cocky that they were going to get Fedotov, and it turns out it's not quite as easy as that?
No, because I think that there's more to it than just the contract signed. Like, there was a picture.
I understand.
Because here's the other part of the equation. There was a picture that went out of him signing said contract.
Okay.
And I don't think that the picture comes from like, hey, I think like someone who was with him took the picture of him signing this thing and faxed over. It looked like he was almost already here.
Okay.
So I think that there's a way to make it work. Like, in terms of they'll fit, like, the logistics of this are not an issue. It just comes down to when training camp starts, who looks more ready for the job. I think Sandstrom can do it. I'd love to see because here's the thing about Fedotov. You can't really argue with a guy with a goalie who's 6'7", 6'8"-ish, somewhere in the middle, I guess, and, has that kind of build. Like, I hear 6'7", 6'8" goaltenders and start getting shades of Vasilevsky, not in terms of talent level, but just the guy looks massive in goal. Well, of course he looks, looks massive, and that's partially equipment, but he's...
Whenever I hear big goaltender, the first name that always pops into my head is Ben Bishop.
Oh, is that what? Do you know who I think of when I see goaltenders who are like? And I think that I'm trying to remember what his height was. I think it was something like 6'7" or something. Like
Ben Bishop was 6'6". I'm pretty sure.
Well, no, the guy I'm thinking of was the first one I remember that was like that was Steve Valiquette.
Okay.
Valiquette was massive, and there weren't goalies built like that at that time.
No.
Like, that was a very new thing that has become almost the norm. And if you get a guy who's let's just say you get a guy built like Carter Hart, it's a little bit out of the norm because you're like a 6'2" goalie. Okay.
Right. He's a little on the small side.
Right. He's almost on the small side at 6'2".
Right. All right. So do we have anything else on Barry Trotz?
Yes, because I didn't really kind of get into the heart of why they should do it. Because it like I said, it kind of goes against everything I've been saying don't do. Don't hire the guy with with a long history of winning games. Don't hire a previous Stanley Cup champion. Don't do this stuff, right? The reason why I not only take a flyer on him, but I pursue, this is who I write the blank check for. This is where you go big. He's got a track record. I already brought up kind of the Nashville thing, because in Nashville, you got to take a team that's nothing. It's literally starting from day one. And right now today, and I know we're going to get into the playoff stuff in a little bit later on, but when we get into the playoff stuff, and we're going to mention they're not in the playoffs anymore, but when you think of Nashville in May of 2022, what do you think?
Right now it's UC Saros, but just because of how stellar he's playing.
Right, but I'm talking about in general, like the state of their franchise, not in terms of talent, but...
I'll go further than that. For the last close to 10 years, the Nashville Predators have been defined by basically their big four. And for the longest time, it was Roman Josi, Ryan Ellis, Matthias Ekholm, and wait, don't tell me. Who's the fourth guy? Oh, God. I know it was Ekholm, Ellis, Yossi, and
Well, for a few years,
for a minute it was Ryan Suter. For a while it was Shea Weber. For a while it was PK Subban. Yeah, fair enough. I'm just gonna
right. It was that grouping. Okay,
Yeah.
this is where I was trying to go. I know what you're doing. Like you're breaking down the state of like the players and stuff like that. What I'm
Right.
getting at is that in May of 2022, I hear Nashville Predators and I go, it's a legit hockey city now.
Oh, absolutely.
But that doesn't happen without Barry Trotz being the guy that you lean on as the control of your player group. Hey, I'm going to guide you there. Like, I have to be your guide. I have to make line combinations, put the right guy in the lineup, all that type of stuff, right? Nobody coaches for that long in one spot anymore.
No, it really is crazy how much of Nashville's success can be attributed to the fact that they just hired people and stuck with them. Like David Poile is literally the only GM in Nashville Predators history.
Yes.
What GM lasts more than 3 or 4 years?
GMs usually for GMs
5 or 6.
I go 4 or 5 usually. But coaches who lasts more than 3 to 4?
Sure, exactly. And he was there for what?
15 years.
Right. Like
that's unheard of. That will never happen again.
And they weren't particularly good for most of those years.
Actually, hold on a minute. I don't want to say it'll never happen again because there is one coach right now that I can think of.
Dave Haxtell in Seattle.
No, come on. Now, you know the real answer, though, right?
Wait. John Cooper?
Yes.
Okay.
Because John Cooper's already been there for 8.
Yeah.
And you're possibly on the path to a 3-peat here. He's not going anywhere.
What do you mean possibly? They're doing it. I said it earlier in the show.
That's you. Okay, that's you. We'll talk. We're going to get into that later.
All right.
Either way, so
I think you and I both agree that Trotz would be worth the money, and the Flyers should probably go after him.
But like the reason I'm saying is because you take a team like Nashville from day one. It's not a hockey town yet. You got to build the whole culture, and he does over the course of 15 years. You go to Washington. Yep. Washington's a team that they can't get past the second round. They just can't get past second round. They get at the time that he takes over the job, they've got one of the 2 best players in the world because it's still a little bit pre McDavid Matthews time. They're still so new. You can't jump on it yet.
And Ovi was still ridiculous.
Right. Well, he still is, to be honest. But I know what you're talking about. He was one of the top 2 players in the world at that point because it was literally
he was still dominant.
It was because it was always Ovechkin, Crosby. That was the combination. It was just whatever they met. That was
Nathan McKinnon had just started kind of sneaking his way, sneak into that conversation.
Right. But either way, he takes a team that doesn't get past that level. And what's the biggest thing that he did? Convinces a guy like Alex Ovechkin that playing defense matters. And as soon as it got through his head, they won a Stanley Cup. And he probably would have never been the head coach of the New York Islanders if the Washington Capitals
decided to pay him.
Right. Just said, we'll pay you whatever you want.
Pay that man his money.
Right. They did not. So Barry Trotz ends up with the New York Islanders. Here's the thing about when he ends up with the New York Islanders. He ends up on a team that at the time, I think at that point when he joined the team, they had won 1 playoff series in almost 2 decades or something like that, or a little over 2 decades. 1 playoff series. And they also, that particular offseason, lost the franchise player.
Yep.
He up and left. That's it. I'm
just
going
straight
home.
Walked for nothing.
I'm going home. That's what he basically said. I'm going back to my hometown. He leaves. He's the most iconic player the franchise has had since their Stanley Cup dynasty.
The fans revolt.
Right. They're going crazy about this. And he takes a team that just lost its star player, and they win a playoff series in year 1.
And quite frankly, not many people, including myself, predicted them to make the playoffs that year in a very competitive Metropolitan Division. Like they weren't expected
they were
to.
A surprise.
Right.
Well, and then the 2 years after that, we just talked about it. You go up and get to within, you're in overtime of Game 6 against the team that's going to finally win the Stanley Cup, and then you're back in the same situation, Eastern Conference Final. Well,
By the way, I had to get through the Flyers to get there.
Yes.
Game 7 in the bubble, Oscar Lindblom's return.
Right. And again, you get really close. So they did this at the first sign of any adversity whatsoever in a really fluky kind of year where literally every bad card you could be dealt was handed to you.
Yep.
And they just, and I felt like this was an ego thing from Lou Lamoriello. This was listen, I'm right and everybody else is wrong, and I'm doing this because I can. And I
Okay.
don't think that's the right decision. I think the Islanders are a little right now today. The Islanders are worse off for this decision.
I agree.
They might hire somebody else, and it might change things down the road. I can't say that it will or won't.
So I believe he has won the Jack Adams, but I'm going to ask you: is Barry Trotz the best coach in the league? Full stop.
The best coach in the league?
Yeah. I'm not going to go in the world because I don't know. Yeah. But
I'm not gonna say he's the top. I'll give him top 3.
He's in that elite group.
Because if you ask me, we already.
Wait, let me guess. John Cooper and.
I mean, Trotz might be number 2 if you're asking me seriously.
Okay, is it Cooper and Trotz and it's a 2-horse race?
I'm trying to think of anybody. Like, I'm just running down kind of in my head who else would fall in line with
I
that.
hate to say it. Does Mike Sullivan make that list?
Yeah, probably kind of right now. I mean, I
think he's a third, to be fair.
Well, right, but from a standpoint of longevity meeting results, it's getting pretty darn close.
Okay. I think that's fair.
I'm not if we're talking specifically with one team, like there are coaches.
I think Bruce Cassidy has a case as well.
The only reason he loses to Mike Sullivan is because he doesn't have the finish line.
I agree, and that's why I said he's in the race, and I think he's more of a top 5 kind of guy.
I mean, if here's the scary thing. Do you want and I'm not joking when I say this is kind of a scary thought, but you know who ranks pretty darn high up there right now?
Okay.
Craig Berube, probably. No, from a standpoint of what kind of level of success have you had and longevity with the same team. It lines up right now.
Especially because those St. Louis Blues don't look bad.
Most of these coaches currently in the NHL have not coached their current team for much more than 2 or 3 years at most. And
there's been a lot of turnover.
Berube won a cup in his first half year, latched on from there, and has now since re-signed. So it's going to be longer. Maybe the old
Matt Murray.
And and another guy who probably falls in line with this, and again, playoff success needing to be a little bit more before he gets higher on the list, but someone who's starting to earn the longevity part of this, Rod Brindamore.
Oh yeah,
he's starting to earn the longevity portion because he's been there for a while.
If Rod gets a cup as a coach there, first of all, they anoint him in Raleigh. Second of all,
he isn't already.
He's pretty close.
He was the captain of the team that did win the cup.
He's pretty close, man. He's their Bobby Clark in a lot of ways.
Kind of, yeah. I'll tell you.
Except Bobby didn't coach them to, playoff success.
I'll tell you who their Bobby Clark is if you're being really serious, because he was on the cup team anyway. He just wasn't the captain of it. It's Eric Stahl.
Okay, fair.
Eric Stahl was the homegrown. Look who we got from day one.
But But if Rod coaches there for 20 years and brings 4 cups home,
yeah,
he'll be the guy. He is definitely on the Carolina Hurricanes Mount Rushmore at this point. He has to be.
Oh, sure. Oh boy. So do we really have to do this right now?
No, we'll get into. Maybe we'll do some Mount Rushmores over the summer. That sounds like a fun show topic.
The reason why I'm not saying do we have to get into this now is because of which team you picked. Because 2 of them that belong on the Mount Rushmore played here first.
I know. No, Rod Brindamore belongs to Carolina. I would love to claim him.
I didn't say he was a Mount Rushmore level player in Philadelphia, but he did.
I understand.
Here first. That's all I'm saying. He played here first. It could have been here.
I understand, but he belongs to Carolina.
Oh, he does.
He's done too much for that team, that city.
Well, the other guy who I was going to put on the Mount Rushmore anyway belongs to Carolina too, and to me, because Justin Williams belongs to Carolina.
Yeah, and again, that barely counts. He played 2 years in Philly?
Doesn't matter. He still played here.
Come on.
He was a Flyer draft pick.
Come on.
He was a Flyer draft pick.
All right, speaking of Flyers draft picks.
Yes, that's a good segue, isn't it?
That is a fantastic segue. So we did have the draft lottery last week. The Flyers ended up slipping 1 spot from 4th to 5th and end up with the 5th overall pick in the 2022 draft. Like I said, we will talk about this as we get a little closer. We'll have some time after the playoffs, and we'll do at least one pre-draft show and kind of break down some options here. But I'll throw this out here. I'll throw you up a softie because we talked about it right before the show.
Right.
Hey, Kevin, if you had to put money on it, do you think the Philadelphia Flyers end up making this 5th overall selection?
Okay, I love how you're just teeing it up this way, as if as a question, as opposed to
the statement of fact that I know it is?
No, because of the fact that what I really want to tell people then is instead of you teeing it up like that, the thing happened, the lottery happened, I saw where they were picking, and I immediately texted the group chat and said, they're not keeping this pick.
No, I agree.
That was just my gut. Like, it was an initial gut feeling from seeing it. I have a gut feeling this pick is getting traded.
Now, and again, this is something we can break down kind of moving forward. We don't want to spend a ton of time on it here and now. Do you think this is a trade down situation, or are they trading this piece for like a major asset?
It's a tough call because let's put it this way: there's two things that factor into this right now. Number one is what would potentially be available for a pick in the top 5, like, and I'm not talking about other pick wise. Like, if you were to try to make a legitimate hockey trade and use that pick to get something in the here and now that's already established that immediately goes on your team. It's going to be hard to do because you don't exactly have cap space to do it, but, I digress with that. There's plenty of time at the draft to determine whether or not you're going to keep going, right? Like, you don't need to worry about what the final cap picture looks like on draft day. You need to worry about that when free agency's over and all that stuff. So that's one thing is what's available, like in terms of if you would make a legit hockey trade or not.
Question for you.
Okay.
You're Chuck Fletcher.
Yes.
Vancouver calls.
Okay.
We'll let you negotiate the contract first, but would you trade the 5th overall pick for Brock Besser?
Tempting. I mean, I don't know if it's...
That feels like the kind of name that just makes
right.
Some sense.
It's got to be a splash. You're not like you need to get somebody who is established as,
and maybe there's more pieces there. Maybe that's
player.
Not enough for Brock Besser.
Right. I don't know.
But I'm just throwing that out there as the framework.
And there's another thing that I want people to kind of just keep in the memory bank for right now, given the state of the Flyers at the moment, and what like the assets and the poker chips that they have to play with, if you will. And that is that Chuck Fletcher acquired a certain pick in a certain round in another draft year that he might not get to officially use when that time comes. Which means that if he's going to use it in any way possible to
it's going to be a trade chip.
Right, exactly. Which means the pick that they got for Claude Giroux, which was a 2024 first, I'm not sitting here saying it influences what you do on draft day with this particular pick, but that would also be a trade chip because there's no denying the situation. We've already said as much. He's on the hot seat.
Sure, he should be.
It's got to move in a certain direction, or he's going to be part of the next round of changes in some way, shape, or form. It's going to have to be. Because there's not much else you can do. You're going to have a new head coach after this year, so whoever that is doesn't matter. You're not going to make another change immediately because it's not working with the current coach at that given moment. That's not going to be. There's no way in hell to me that you look at the coach this year and call and say, whatever's happening is a reflection on the coach himself. Right. If it's not going well, it is not a reflection on the coach. It's going to be a continued reflection on the roster that was put together, and whether it's veteran level players who aren't playing up to par, whether it's young players who haven't been developed enough or aren't getting that kind of teaching element anymore, or whatever it is. That's just what it comes down to. And if things look, if all that stuff like we talked about in the last show, if all that hopeful stuff falls into place and things start working and the coaching staff works, which is, again, why Barry Trotz could be a potential fit, because if you're not banking on hope, but if you're looking for someone who kind of gets a lot out of even the most minimal players, I mean, let's put it this way. To me, the Islanders had the best fourth line in hockey for the previous 3 years.
Yeah, and that line includes Matt Martin, who is not necessarily the most skilled player.
Right. So
we're talking about great deployment. We're talking about great coaching.
Sure. So, well, not only that, but then you look at some of the other young guys, too. Like, you look at how Noah Dobson has trended upward. Barzal was already going to because he's like the elite level talent. But they got the most out of a lot of those guys. Beauvillier turned into a guy that you were watching as a threat every night. And he had an influence on the veteran players, Anders Lee and Brock Nelson, guys who had been around the block with other coaches that suddenly, all of a sudden, were having some of the best years of their lives. It just happens that way.
He knows how to squeeze blood from a stone.
Sure.
Better than any coach in history.
So, point being, if Chuck Fletcher's on the hot seat, which obviously he is, because the state of your franchise is awful right now.
I expect him to take a home run swing.
But the best way to do it might be, hey, I've got the 5th overall pick in 2022, and I got a 2024 first waiting for somebody. Those things to me become trade chips. I can't see how otherwise. Like, I just...
Yeah, this has potential to be a very volatile offseason.
Sure. And I don't want to make it sound like they're definitively trading the pick or anything like that, because you can get, like, at the end of the day, here's the real answer when it comes to the draft. And this is why people who are freaking out about the way that things went, first of all, yes, the lottery was incredibly confusing. That's par for the course for the NHL.
And it is the first year of the new format, so like you got to give people a chance to get used to it. But also then
make the new format be a situation where, yes, in a typical situation, you should have the best odds to pick 4th. If you were the fourth best odds at the first overall pick, then you should have the best odds to pick 4th. And instead, it was the best odds where you pick 5th. How does that work exactly? Like, leave it to the NHL to make something even more confusing than it has to be, right?
I guess, yeah.
But either way, there were people getting really, like, frustrated with it and things like that. And at the end of the day, here's the truth of the matter, and it was true the last time the Flyers picked in the top 5 as much as it is right now. No matter where you pick in the top 5 or whatever, you're getting a good player.
Sure.
Good. What you do from there determines what happens. Now, he could be an elite level talent, the teams that pick
he could be scratched on a Vegas Golden Knights team that missed the playoffs.
Right. Like, my point is that. But my point where I was going with that was he could be an elite level talent that doesn't that on natural skill alone turns into a superstar. Sometimes you land the Connor McDavids, right? Like, there are kids out there that can do just that.
Sure.
There are also years where you need to see where it goes in terms of, like 2017, not just with Nolan Patrick, but see where it goes with, hey, Nico Hischier hasn't made the playoffs yet.
Right.
All right. You got to work at it. You can't just assume he's going to just jump in and be perfect. You got to work with him. Miro Heiskanen has made the playoffs a couple times.
Made a Stanley Cup final.
Just depends on what kind of teaching level and development you have and all that stuff. And then obviously you could also, at any point in the top 5 or otherwise, land a guy like Cale Makar. It's always possible.
Right, and look at the team around him, right? The team around Miro Heiskanen in Dallas is not the same as the team around Nico Hischier in New Jersey.
Neither of those teams are the same as the one around Cale Makar either.
Yeah, you're not wrong.
Cale Makar is a juggernaut.
And that all comes back to, that was the Erik Karlsson trade, correct?
Yeah, I guess so, yeah.
Right. That 4th overall pick that ended up not being top 5 or top 10 protected or anything like that. And remember that draft lottery? That was crazy.
You're talking about for Makar?
Yeah.
No, okay, no, it wasn't.
That's not the pick they ended up using on Makar.
Right, no, because what happened that year? I remember what happened that year. Colorado was the worst team in the league and should have picked first, and 3 teams jumped them.
Right. I
of them
remember.
weren't
That was the most absurd lottery.
Right. That lottery was nuts, and all these teams were jumping places, and Colorado just sat there in 4th.
Same thing happened to Detroit at least once, right?
I think for Detroit it happened...
I think it happened twice.
It happened a couple years ago, as recently as a couple years ago. Because year they got Lucas Raymond 4th overall, they should have had the first pick if it was typical reverse order, and it didn't. Like, everything went wrong because that was the year that the Rangers got the first pick because they were supposed to win the Lafreniere sweepstakes.
Yep.
And they didn't. They possibly ended up better off.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and
I mean, Lafreniere's
maybe that's a bit of a recurring theme.
But Lafreniere's got a lot going on around him too. And Lucas Raymond doesn't. And
all right, can we? Speaking of Lafreniere, can we finally start talking about good teams now?
We will. What I wanted to sit there and say about the pick thing is that I know people were getting mad about it. You're going to get a good player, and they could keep it and look at good players. I'm not going to jump into all the names today.
We'll do that closer to the draft.
Here's the deal: if you keep the 5th pick, strictly stay 5th. You're not getting Shane Wright because even if Shane Wright, because I saw some kind of crazy Twitter buzz today that there were people saying that Montreal may not be sold on him as the first overall pick.
We always hear this.
We do. But here's the thing. Even if he doesn't get picked first, is he really dropping 4 spots? Never.
Absolutely not.
No way, shape, or form. As a matter of fact, like to me, I'm not saying I'm not only buying into that he's going to be a good player. He's quite possibly the only player who should be playing at the NHL level next season.
I think he probably is in this draft class.
There's the name that I keep hearing as the number 2 in this draft is probably Logan Cooley. Yep. And then beyond that, we mentioned Slavkovsky, who's the Slovak kid who had a great Olympics and all that stuff.
I've seen some projections having him go second over Cooley, but either way, they're both kind of that next tier.
I don't want to take away. Yes, absolutely. And it could go either way. You start to get into the 4th through 10th range, if you will. And the 2 things that are out there, well, it's 3 players, but 2 things that are out there that could be beneficial to the Flyers if they want to use this type of stuff, right? Like if they want to use the pick, is you can either there's going to be 2 right-handed defensemen, which is certainly a help, or the name is what is it, Matt Savoy?
Yeah, Matthew Savoy is a very talented player.
Smaller skill kind of guy who could, be that type of player. And he's
shades of that Cole Caulfield type pick.
A little less, though, because he plays down the middle, I believe. And because of that, he's
a little more responsible.
Sure. Or at least that's the goal, is that there's going to be more responsibility. I mean, look, no matter what, and this is where I keep going with this, they could pick Savoy, they could pick any of these other guys. Doesn't matter. He's not playing here next year.
Right.
Or
shouldn't be, at least.
No, there's no way. They've got enough.
Here's the thing, man.
They've got enough young guys that are going to be trying to crack the roster.
Should Nolan Patrick have played day 1?
Yes, because there was no option in between. No, there was no option in between.
I guess you're right. He couldn't go back to Brandon. You're right.
Because if he went back to Brandon, it would have
been bored.
No, but it would have made things worse. And the reason it would have made things worse is because after having 2 years of whatever the point totals were, I know they were north of 150 some odd games or whatever it was. Did we need what he would have ended up with? A Morgan Frost year.
Yeah,
a draft plus 1 year would have been, look at these numbers, these are absurd. He's going to be a superstar at the NHL level.
Yeah, but I wonder if that would have been good for him.
Maybe,
I wonder if playing one more season of 50-something games instead of 80, if one more season of being able to dominate as a big fish in a small pond, I can't help but play a little hindsight's 2020. But anyway, this is not the Nolan Patrick show. We have a long summer ahead to talk trash about him. The Flyers are going to pick 5th overall. We'll do a little bit of a more detailed breakdown of who we expect to be there when we get a little closer.
The other thing about the draft, and this is why we're going to move on to the next stuff pretty much right now, is because, look, we can sit here and run down names and all that type of stuff, and the bottom line is there's still almost 2 months until the pick actually gets used in one way or another. Let's remember that last year when the Flyers traded their first-round pick in the Rasmus Ristolainen deal, that it didn't come down until the day of the draft.
Right.
You have way too much time to speculate what they're going to do with it, who they could take with it, all that type of stuff. We do not need to do this today on May 15th. I agree. So,
what we do need? What we do need to do today on May 15th. And listen, I've been doing this show with you for a very long time. I don't know the exact count, but we got to be getting close to 100 episodes. You've been on a lot here.
Yeah, the overall episode number is 150.
This is episode 150, bit of a big one, yeah. So I think I know by now when you're a little distracted, and I know perfectly well because I am also distracted.
Yes,
you and I are both watching the Pittsburgh New York Rangers game.
Keeping a close eye on it as much as we can, yes.
Because we're recording this on Sunday night. It's going to go out pretty much right after we're done recording.
Monday morning-ish, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, it's going to be look, we can't control the fact that there were 2 Game 7s on Sunday night.
Following 3 on Saturday, by the way.
Well, and here's the thing. We can at least kind of talk about this game in progress. Normally we do this type of stuff in the morning and we would have had nothing. We would have just been guessing.
Right. So we're talking about this game here, and as we sit here now, it's currently 1-1, and we're in the second period. Tristan Jarry has returned from injury to play Game 7 and looks fantastic, by the way.
I'm sorry, I made a face because Igor Shesterkin just made one hell of a save.
He sure did. Both goalies both goalies are playing incredible hockey. But
yes.
We talked about this a little bit before the show. We were doing a little formatting talk just to pull back the curtain here. And you said, "Oh, we're going to give this time. We're going to give this game a little bit of time to marinate. Try to see if we can kind of make some predictions about who might be winning this game and moving on to face the Carolina Hurricanes before we get into that series." And it's 1-1. Almost halfway through the game.
Okay, so here's the thing. First of all, one thing I don't mind doing in the meantime while this game continues to progress is talking about the other series that have actually officially.
And we will be doing that.
And speak of the devil, as we say that, it's 2-1 Pittsburgh right now.
Oh, your stream's ahead of mine.
Okay.
Rip.
Well, no, I'm actually watching. I have the TV turned towards me, so I'm actually watching.
That makes sense.
I'm not watching on the stream. That's why.
The TBS app for iPhone is awful. That's my. Never mind.
Shocker! Guess who scored the goal? I'm not going to tell you who.
Sid?
No.
Oh.
Who's the other most obvious guy to score that goal?
Was it Gino?
No.
Sorry, I'm trying to see who's on the ice here right now because they still have the puck. There's still 12:20 left. I'm way behind you.
Wow. Oh, you're way behind us right then.
Yeah.
12:20 left in the second period for you?
Yeah, I'm going to reboot this stream.
Yeah, you might need to pick it back up because there's it's under 10 now.
Oh, Jesus. Okay, I'm way behind. Okay.
Pittsburgh was on a power play.
Oh, okay.
So now I gave you a hint now.
That's fine. Was it Jake Gensel? Because he's been scoring his tail off this postseason.
Well, okay, hang on a second, because hold everything.
Are they reviewing it?
That it's very dangerously close to a high stick.
Okay, well, listen, why don't we leave our listeners on a bit of a cliffhanger? They'll know the results in the morning, but we'll touch back on this at the end of the show.
Yes. No, I think it wouldn't be bad to also touch on some of the series that have completed. We made...
Yeah.
Do you remember what your predictions were? I have mine written down.
I don't have mine written down, but I'm pretty sure I remember. I don't remember number of games.
Okay, that's fair.
What series you want to start with?
Let's do the one that I feel like we need to talk the least about because it was over first.
Okay, I agree. Colorado in 4. I know I had Colorado in 4. I think you gave Nashville a game or two, and I said, nah, it's Colorado.
Okay, there's two problems with what happened when I gave Nashville kind of a pity game. Number one,
did you think UC Saros was playing?
I thought he might play when it got down to crunch time.
Yeah.
Number one, and the other part of the equation was I sure as hell didn't expect that the third string guy in Connor Ingram to come in and actually damn near steal a game.
He played well.
I mean, I tweeted this out after the series was over, and not to overshadow what Colorado did at all, because I did give them full props. But, for a guy who came in who had all of 3 regular season games to his name in his career.
Right.
He appears in all 4 in the series. And kept them in every single, outside the first one, which was completely out of hand. The other games were all close at various points, whether it was you had one that went to overtime that was probably Nashville's best chance to win. You had a game that eventually, midway through the second period, was evened up 3-3. And then you had the game where Nashville actually had the lead for a few moments. It was that close with this kid net, who I think now quite possibly becomes part of the equation for them, does he not?
Sure, absolutely. This wasn't one of those blowout 1v8 sweeps that you see sometimes where every game is 6-2 because the 1 seed is just tuning up for the real boys. Right. This was a real series. Colorado was never comfortable. They were never dominant.
Game 1.
Game 1 they were. You're right.
Yeah.
And
but outside of that, I think they were. If we're being serious, and I'm not trying to downplay anything that Nashville had going at that point, but for Game 1, look, if you're going to end up starting David Riddick as your goalie in the playoffs against a team like that, good luck. Well, 2 things. A, good luck with that when Saros was down and all that stuff. But the other part of the problem was that, if I'm not mistaken, they led the last game of the season in the regular season that would have given them Calgary instead.
Yep.
And you get stuck with what you get stuck with.
Yeah, that's what happens.
There's no way around it.
All right, let's stay in that division here. So Colorado won 4 games. They will play the winner of the Minnesota-St. Louis series. we talked about it a little bit earlier when we mentioned Craig Berube, but the Blues look pretty good through 6 games.
Yeah, see, I got this one completely wrong.
Me too.
I don't want to say completely wrong.
We both had this series going to 7, I believe, and I think we agreed that Game 7 is a toss-up call.
I had it go. Yeah, I had it going to 7.
Okay.
And so I agreed it was a toss-up call. Look, the thing that changed that whole series is the goaltending change. They got 3. You get through 3 games. It's not going well for. It's not going well for St. Louis at that point. They've lost 2 games. They won game 1 pretty convincingly, but they lose 2 more. And when they lost those 2 games in a row and decide to make a change in goal, like they go to Binnington, and that totally changed everything. Like it was amazing to me how that change turned the whole series on its head and just, it just changed the game completely. And, look, credit to them. I kind of, maybe, I don't know, maybe I gave Minnesota too much credit. I don't know.
Minnesota didn't look bad, though. Like I know it doesn't really show in the end scores here, but every game was competitive. It never felt like they were completely out of it, really.
No, but I'll tell you what their biggest problem was, if I'm being completely honest. I go back and I look at the numbers at the end of that series for Minnesota.
Okay.
And there's a bunch of guys on the team that were kind of one-off goal scorers. Joel Eriksson-Ek had 3 in the series, I believe, and then Kirill Kaprizov had 7. The guy accounted for a majority of your offense.
Can't fault him.
No, as a matter of fact, and I don't want to jump too far into let's talk awards too and all that stuff like that, but he had a legit case for the Hart. If he was a finalist, people should not have been questioning it.
I agree. I think Minnesota found out what happens, and I'm not giving this player a hard time.
Okay.
I think Minnesota found out what happens when a significant portion of your offense runs through a guy like Ryan Hartman. He's a good player, but this season was kind of a breakout season for him, and
he was just incredibly invisible in that series from that standpoint. Yes.
Yep, and I'm trying not to dunk on him too bad because he really did have a career season, and for a guy that's been a middle 6/bottom 6 kind of guy in the NHL, I'm happy to see the success for him. But we need it in the playoffs too if you're going to make the big boy bucks.
Right. I mean, the offense dried up for a lot of guys, not just Hartman. Like Fiala wasn't quite what he usually is, and even it looked dangerous a lot of times, but couldn't finish. Like it was just that kind of series for them. I think that they're a better team than what they showed, but St. Louis is. I almost kind of wonder if that's the experience thing kind of coming out. Like St. Louis has been there, done that. You get Ryan.
A lot of that team is the same crew that won the Cup.
Right. So when you get Ryan O'Reilly, Braden Shen, David Perron, all those guys out there, and then on the back end, let's just say on the back end, it's not, and he's not even playing, but I'm mentioning his name anyway. But you get a Torrey Krug who's kind of been in the playoffs all the time.
Hey, he was in that Stanley Cup series too.
Yeah, in a different way.
Yeah.
But I'll take. But here's the guy I will take, and I'll throw it right out there. Then I'll take a Colton Parayko who's been around the block and did it then and is doing it now.
I remember when Colton Parayko was like this young up and coming stud defenseman.
Right.
He was going to take over and he's done it. He's been a stellar defenseman very quietly. Really his name does not get mentioned in kind of top tier circles
because he does the dirty work. He's physical and he blocks shots and he does all that kind of stuff and he may score a goal on occasion, but it doesn't happen a lot. And those guys,
he's one of those X factor guys.
But they never get the props they should.
No, I agree.
They get the props they should from people like us who do something like this every week. But most games and people don't even know that they're even there.
All right,
and that's a compliment. By the
so
way.
I'm going to transition us because another player who I think plays a very similar game to that, even though he's a forward, is a guy like Philip Deneau.
Oh yeah.
And I do want to talk about that Edmonton-LA series because that is the only other series in the West that has concluded. Like I mentioned before, we are recording this live. Calgary versus Dallas. Puck drops in about an hour.
Yeah, so we will not. We will not even be recording when this happens.
No, we will not. Edmonton and LA. Through the first 3 games of this series, I really thought Edmonton was running away with it. I thought it was Edmonton in 5. They scored 6 goals in game 2. They scored 8 goals in game 3. Game 1 was a nice tight game, and I thought that was LA's best effort. And from there on, it was just going to be the Edmonton Steamrollers.
You want my thoughts on how as these games progressed?
Yeah.
Game 1 happened, and I got a big smile on my face, and I went, "Here we go again." And this is everything I felt like I saw coming. It felt that way after Game 1. Yeah, I hear you. Games 2 and 3 happened the way they did, and I'm like, okay, maybe it's a little different. And then Game 4 happened, and the series was tied again.
And Philip Deneau went, nope.
Right, and then Game 5 happened, and Adrian Kempe scored a real nice goal in overtime.
That game was nuts.
And I went, oh boy, it's happening. It's happening exactly as I envisioned it, because I said LA in 6.
Yep.
And here's the truth of the matter. I'm convinced that if Game 6, which was tied 2-2 with about 5-6 minutes left in the third period, I'm convinced if that game got to overtime, LA was winning that series.
I don't disagree with you. For me, by the way, Game 5 was the game of the series. That game was so incredibly fun to watch.
It was. And the thing was that I know it because I already know where you're going to go with this, because Edmonton got a couple of power plays in the third period, and it was like that last one in particular when they're down 4-3, that the door could not have been more wide open in that given moment if you tried. Yep. Like it's like I knew what was coming. I actually was doing some I know it's a little later at night by that point, but I was doing a couple little household items, getting ready for the end of the night. And I actually walked away and I left there and I came back up and I saw 4-4, and I didn't even need to look to find out who did what, because I felt like I already knew in my head. I'm like, it's those two. We know which two. It's always them.
Yep. And Leon Draisaitl just decided that they weren't losing that game. Like he looked a little dinged up as the series went on. We know that he kind of sustained some nicks and bruises that hopefully he's getting a couple days to recover from here.
He definitely didn't look like himself in Game 6, I'll tell you that. Or Game 7, I mean. Sorry, Game 7.
Game 5, he was putting the miles down. He was doing the hard work. Leon Draisaitl had a hell of a series, and if Edmonton makes a run, he might be 25% of the way to a Conn Smythe.
You're talking about Draisaitl?
Yep.
Then what is McDavid the other 75% of the way?
Well,
there?
No, I just mean they're through one round, right? We're through one round. He's 25% of the way, but he has laid the groundwork, in my opinion.
I disagree with you, and the only reason I do is, and I'll tell you why. Because in Game 7 in particular, when Draisaitl did not completely look like himself, Connor McDavid took the team and put it on his shoulders and said, I'm getting you to the second round, boys.
You're right.
And he, finally for him, not that they haven't been like they've won, I think they've won a playoff series with him before. It's not like they've been completely shut out, but there's fun. Like there just feels like there's a little something different with them now with the way that kind of closed out. He is shouldering more of it, but doing it in such a way that it makes it feel different.
Yep.
I still don't completely trust their goaltending. I can't. I won't at any point.
I do want to give Mike Smith credit.
I want to give him credit too, but
29 save shutout in Game 7.
Yes, and he picked up a good chunk of that down the stretch, but
LA was pouring it on.
Sure, but up until then, I remember hearing something about how shots were something like 38-18 halfway through the third or something, and that to me was exactly what it turned into, and I tweeted it after the game was over where I said Connor McDavid stays hot, and the Oilers played a perfect defensive game when they needed it the most, and boy did they ever. Like, for so much of that game, it was there for the taking for LA to an extent. Like if they could break through that wall and find a way, maybe even just to get the first one in some crazy fashion, I don't want to completely jump over to the East right away here.
No, I do want to put a neat little bow on the West before we move over.
Oh yeah, but there's there was a particular Game 7 that happened, and this doesn't give it away because there's been multiple, obviously. But there was a particular Game 7 where there was very clearly some nervous energy going on, and I think that in Edmonton, if LA had scored first in that game, despite what was happening,
it would have gotten real nervous.
There was some huge nervous energy if that's the case. And
palms sweaty, knees weak, arms heavy, full blown Eminem. Absolutely.
No, but at what a time down the stretch of that game, it's still 1-0 under 5 minutes to go, and McDavid just decides right then and there,
ping.
I'm putting an end to this thing right now. And I was actually driving
Dagger.
home. I was driving home last night when that was still on. I was listening to the third period on the radio, and I heard that goal, and I went, "That's it. It's over."
Okay. You remember the fire that Claude Giroux had in the 2012 playoff series against the Pittsburgh Penguins?
Yeah.
I saw that fire in Connor McDavid this series.
I think, look, Connor McDavid, to me, as a superstar player who knows he's among the best in the world, and there's no way he can't know that. You just kind of get used to hearing your name and seeing it all over the place. Like, you just know. I think that he's tired of the narrative that exists that they don't get particularly far, and why not take, like, in that type of situation, take matters into your own hands.
For sure.
Just do it. Like, you're the best player in the world. Go and
he did.
Take matters into your own hands, and he sure did. And
yeah.
You know what? Like, here's the thing. I'm disappointed. I'm disappointed that I got the prediction wrong because I want to get. Of course, we all want to get as many of those right as we can, right? But I think as hockey fans, no matter what our predictions were, and hockey fans everywhere really should be saying this, we're in a better place today because Connor McDavid's got more games to play.
It is
and
good for
Leon
the game.
Draisaitl too. Like, I don't want to take him just out of the picture here. He was great in the series too. So,
and if they win their second round series, and we will do quick predictions before we jump over to the East, and Colorado wins their second round series, I look forward to seeing that clash in the conference finals if they get there.
What we really need to see, if I'm being honest, and I don't look, we're not going to be able to talk about Game 7 of Calgary-Dallas in its finality. Like, we won't know who wins the series. But isn't there a pretty obvious team that would be fitting to go here?
Please let Calgary go through.
Right.
I can't watch Connor McDavid play against a stifling defense again. Please let him play against a run-and-gun, high-octane team. Please?
Well, okay. Can I tell you what I think? And this is not to jump to predictions or anything like that, because I will be honest about something right off the bat with the Calgary-Dallas series. I'm not telling you I hate that style of hockey because it's stifling. I get that point. I get why teams play that way, and it does work.
Defense wins championships.
This has not been a particularly impressive series from either team. I think it's been a very impressive series from both teams' goaltenders.
Yes.
Like, to me, like, Jacob Markstrom's already a finalist for the Vezina. He's not going to win, by the way, because the goalie who's going to win is actively playing in a game as we speak.
Jacob Ottinger is actively building an incredible resume for himself.
Jake Ottinger has now, to me, become a name that people should now associate as a starting goaltender in this league.
Okay, if you're listening to this show and you play fantasy hockey, you need to know the name Jake Ottinger heading into next year. You need to, because if you're not drafting him, he's a waiver wire pickup, and quite frankly, you should probably be drafting him. Anyway, I agree. This series, I haven't watched a ton of this series because This is one of those Western Conference series that's kind of drifted on me a little bit. But I certainly will be watching Game 7 tonight because,
of course,
who can't watch Game 7 hockey? We mentioned the fact that we're both actively watching Rangers Penguins.
All right, which, by the way, is a great Game 7.
Oh, yeah. Honestly, I think they all have been so far.
Pretty close. I mean, the LA-Edmonton one, it turned into one of those defensive battles.
But it was still – it was an edge-of-your-seat game for 54 minutes.
Oh, sure. It absolutely is. I do want to say, like, I already mentioned, like, who we would like to see play Edmonton in the next round, probably just for the sake of saying Battle of Alberta kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
You're right, though. If Edmonton were to go and play a Battle of Alberta and then win the series and gets a team like Colorado with McKinnon and all that type of, like, come on, you're just drawing up absolutely
fireworks.
You're just drawing up one great series after another.
Yep.
And one thing I want to say, not to go backwards here, but one thing I want to say about Colorado in particular, because Colorado was the only series that went less than 5.
Right.
Like,
so they've got
we had a bunch of 6s, or we had 2 6s, a bunch 5 Game 7s.
So we have the standard question. Right. Are they rested or are they rusty?
Well, sure. That's one thing about it. But the thing I wanted to go into is one of the things that I tweeted after it was over was, and I know you've already given your thoughts on this multiple times, so I'm not even going to go. I'm not going to go here because you've said it already. But 2 years ago, everybody was saying it's Tampa's time. It's Tampa's time. That this right now sure feels like it's starting. Like, to me, Colorado is looking like that team right now. It's only the first round that can change, but the way they played in that first round, I'm getting vibes like that. I definitely do not think that there was another team in the Western Conference portion of the playoffs that played a series that showed me as much as Colorado did, in terms of that Colorado is very clearly that's where the bar is set in that conference.
Here's why I'm not willing to go there yet.
Okay.
They played, in my opinion, probably the weakest team to make the playoffs.
Fair. I'm not disagreeing with that.
Without their starting goalie.
And again, fair. There's elements of their game that I see that, like, they just knew exactly what to do in each game situation. Like, they trailed at one point, they were in an overtime, they were locked in high-scoring tie games. Like, they just knew how to handle it, and it just
Colorado or St. Louis.
Oh, I think Colorado for sure.
Okay, and we're not, how many games?
It's gonna be at this point, nothing's gonna be short. Nothing is going to be short.
Okay. I
think Colorado can do it in 6 probably, but St. Louis has a winning pedigree, so I'm not going to sit there and say that this can't go 7. I still would give it to Colorado because Colorado's going to play on home ice in a game 7. I just don't see something about Colorado being able to potentially be the team that holds. Like, I think Colorado is the team that would be the second highest team that would hold home ice for the rest of it. Like, outside of Florida, who won the President's Trophy. It's Colorado, right?
I'm gonna spoil the rest of my Western Conference prediction bracket here.
Oh boy!
In an ideal world, we would get Connor McDavid playing the Kings because you got to, and then Calgary, and then Colorado. I think instead we are destined for Connor McDavid to run into the LA Kings, the Dallas Stars, and the St. Louis Blues, and just have the absolute worst grind to the Stanley Cup that has ever existed.
Yeah, okay. I'm here. I lost you during that whole thing, so can you just...
Yeah, you're fine.
Okay, can you give me your in an ideal world?
Yeah.
I lost you.
In an ideal world, we'd have Connor McDavid play, the LA Kings because you got to. But then you'd have him play Calgary, and then you'd have him play Colorado.
Right.
So, what I think is going to happen is that Connor McDavid is going to get to play Philip Deneau and the LA Kings.
Mm-hmm.
All the monsters in Dallas, and then the St. Louis Blues. I think the St. Louis Blues take this series in 7 in Colorado. I think Nathan McKinnon's... I think the conversation about Nathan McKinnon can't win the big one is going to gain a little steam on it. I think he's getting close to that Alex Ovechkin not being able to beat the Penguins thing. And then, St. Louis and Edmonton. Oh, man. That's a fun matchup in the conference finals.
So I want to piggyback off of that because there's a point in there where you're right about certain things with it, because it's not just McKinnon at that point. It's a collective unit thing where it starts to become how many years have they had this group, and, it's not getting far enough. I mean, realistically, they need to get to a conference final. Yeah. They need this series. Like, that kind of fuels my prediction a little bit because, yes, they're the number 1 seed in the West, overall. They need this series.
Would it really shock you if St. Louis comes out and wins game 1?
No, absolutely not.
And at that moment,
you
put Colorado on the back foot.
You do, but I'm kind of doing a reversal of last. I guess it would be last year, because I distinctly remember Colorado taking it to a particular team that won the series anyway down the road. So just because a team loses game 1 and may lose it convincingly, because sitting around waiting for all this to finalize and all that stuff, like, I totally get it. I don't think that derails them in the series, but I am not thinking it's out of the realm of possibilities that St. Louis comes out strong and delivers that kind of game in game one.
That's going to be a fun series to watch. That's going to be a physical series.
Sure it is. Absolutely. Because St. Louis is so built for the playoffs, and Colorado needs to show that they're built for the playoffs. That Colorado should be built for the playoffs.
St. Louis is going to test Nazem Kadri's newfound patience.
Yeah, a little.
It's going to test if his fuse is really as long as he wants us to think it is.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's going to be an interesting dynamic. It really is. So we'll have to see. Look, I'm picking, like, maybe I'm pulling back the curtain on my predictions. All this, like this thing. Like I said, it kind of feels like it's Colorado's time.
Okay.
I know I like them. I kind of am getting, I don't know. There's just, I'm thinking, I'm thinking of the mid '90s and that kind of stuff, and I'm thinking,
Can Joe Sakic just grow the goatee out?
Yeah, maybe a little. Actually, when they won in 01, Joe Sakic had no facial hair at all.
Oh, he didn't.
No, I mean, let's just say Peter Forsberg could grow a good beard.
That's fair.
And what you're thinking of is Ray Bourque had the goatee.
Yeah, Ray Bourque had the goatee. You're right. All right. If Edmonton plays Calgary, who you got?
You know what? I had LA winning the series initially, so because of that, I had Calgary winning the next one because I kind of figured LA was.
I think Calgary can beat Mike Smith. To be honest with you,
I think yes. I think they can. Well, one thing that would favor Calgary for sure is that you're going to get opportunities. Edmonton's not the defensive team that Dallas has been.
No.
So you'll get opportunity. I mean, Edmonton would need to play the way they played Game 7 against LA all the time to silence that group.
Battle of Alberta, 2 high-octane offenses. Ooh, that series could be a good one.
And I got to tell you, you know what else fuels this big time right now?
Yeah.
If you get a series like that, there's going to be animosity. And if there's animosity, there's going to be penalties.
I mentioned the 2012 Flyers-Penguins series earlier.
Right.
This has potential to get there. Maybe not quite to the same level because that was a circus.
But here's the thing.
You'll see the 2022 version of it.
But here's the thing about that. You're going to have penalties. And if you have penalties, you don't need to do anything more than put McDavid, Draisaitl on a bunch of power plays and put Gaudreau, Tkachuk, and Lindholm on a bunch of power plays and wait and see what the hell happens.
I want to see Milan Lucic fight Darnell Nurse. Give it to me.
I will say one thing in particular about that possibility, by the way. Not the fight possibility, but the series. You got Jacob Markstrom in goal on one side, which could be...
That's why I edge Calgary.
But it could be the catalyst of the whole series. It really could be.
That's why I gave Calgary the edge. That's why I think they beat Mike Smith.
I'll agree. I think that Calgary can win that series if they get... At this point in time, here's the thing about that series. And if it is Calgary-Edmonton, I think it's going the distance because I think
it's a rivalry series, and that's just kind of how they go.
But I also think that Edmonton's going to put up way more fight than we've ever seen.
For sure.
If it's Dallas, I think Edmonton wins the series because as much as Dallas is a stifling defense, I think that Calgary lacks a little bit of the speed that Edmonton has. Just like it's going to be a totally different animal keeping up with McDavid all night, like it is keeping up with Gaudreau and like that kind of stuff. Like Tkachuk's not like that. Tkachuk can skate. No, don't get me wrong, but Tkachuk's not McDavid.
Honestly, if the Oilers beat the Kings, I think if they play Dallas, they're playing a slightly watered down version of the Kings.
Possibly.
And they just beat the Kings. So I have Edmonton pretty quick if they play Dallas, maybe 5 or 6.
The other part of the problem for Dallas is going to be that if you're going to go into a series with Edmonton and have to lean on Ottinger again like you have in this series, you're in big trouble against Edmonton. You're in big trouble. And you're in even more trouble if what Edmonton can bring in the speed game leads to way more special teams time. Because you're in a world of trouble at that point. Like that,
Connor McDavid plus open ice is a problem.
I mean, here's the funny part. I'm saying this like this now, and I'm making it sound like if it's Edmonton Dallas, we're looking at like a possible five game series. Like,
yeah,
it's it's going to be one of those series where we're going to sit there and go, Dallas is doing it again. Why? It doesn't make any sense that they're winning, but they probably are. Like,
I agree. I felt that after every game that Dallas won in this series.
Sure, but that's the point. Like, it's going to also happen in a weird sort of way while they're playing the best player in the world in the Edmonton Oilers, like something's just crazy with that. So I don't know what to expect. All I know is whenever we're done with this and we sit back and watch the Game 7 that's left, Calgary and Dallas, I'm hoping for the Battle of Alberta.
Oh yeah.
Well, because here's the thing. We're going to touch on the East series in a moment. I already love the Colorado St. Louis dynamic because it's kind of Colorado is very much in a spot where St. Louis was before they won a cup. Like, they've got the talent. The year that St. Louis won a cup, they were on a magical kind of run, but they had been in playoff series before where they were getting kind of close and didn't get there.
Right.
So I think that St. Louis was so close to Minnesota that if you got Colorado, St. Louis, Edmonton, Calgary, you're getting quite possibly, arguably the 4 best teams in the West anyway, because even though Minnesota finished ahead in the standings of St. Louis looked great in that series at many different points, and I think you'd be getting that legitimate level of, the top teams in the West are playing each other, and it's going to be great. And then, to me, like I said, I have Colorado winning that series for sure in my mind. I don't know if I'm super convinced on who win. I said 7, so I'm not convinced on who would win Calgary Edmonton. But I think, again, whatever happens out of that, if it's Colorado and either or, you're still then getting the 2 best teams that the West has to offer, and it's going to be great.
Yep. Yeah, and quite frankly, I don't have any complaints about the Eastern bracket either, and I think it's time we kind of shift over towards the East.
Yep.
Honestly, I think we just talk about the Game 6 first. Yes. Florida-Washington was the only 6-game series in the East. The other 3 have gone to 7, including Rangers-Pittsburgh, which is currently on now. Again, we'll keep you updated. The second period has just ended there, or several minutes ago. But this series, Florida-Washington.
Yes.
Man, how freaking good is Claude Giroux?
Yeah,
come on.
He had 2 great games to close it out.
He was obscene in Game 6.
He was, no question about it.
He was probably the best Panther.
So I want to preface going into this particular series with something that I will say about every series. It doesn't matter which one, even the one that's currently actively happening as we speak. There's not a single team in the Eastern Conference that's still alive or would have possibly been alive with all the Game 7s that have happened that I would have sat there and told you out of the first round, I feel confident in saying they're making the Stanley Cup final or something like that. Like,
I agree.
Every one of these teams had an issue of some kind that nearly cost them the series, one way or another. I think that Florida fell behind too often.
Right. They won a lot of games in overtime, a lot of games in the shootout, a lot of games that you can't win in the playoffs because they were 3-on-3.
Well, yeah, but I'm saying in that series, they were playing chase the game an awful lot. Whether it was, the way that game 3 kind of got out of hand, they ended up they actually ended up leading in Game 1 and then trailed later on. So it was kind of a rough third period. But how many times did they have to win a game? They did it in Game 5. They were down 2-1 in the series, by the way.
Right.
And they had to win Game 4 by tying the game in the final 2 minutes and then win it in overtime to tie the series. They had to come back in Game 5. They had to come back in Game 6 in certain angles and then overcome the fact that once they did make a little bit of a comeback from down 2-1 at one point, they had the lead, gave up a goal in the last minute to keep the thing going, and then had to win in overtime again.
Yep.
So all that stuff comes into play. The other thing that I didn't like about Florida in that sense is that, we know their opponent for tomorrow now, or for the next series, I mean.
Right.
You cannot fall behind that often to Tampa Bay and expect to come back. It's just not going to happen.
You have to play 60 minutes. I know it's cliche. You can't start 5 minutes late or 10 minutes late and expect to compete. they're going to blow your doors
Right.
off.
Right. It's just not going to happen. So that's an area that needs to be corrected for the next series. I think that, first of all, okay, so back to Claude Giroux, because I know you want to talk a little bit of Claude Giroux here. First of all, this looks like a player who's had the weight of the world lifted off his shoulders, in the sense that he doesn't have to be.
He's having fun.
Well, he definitely is having fun. I mean, for goodness sake, he's kissing teammates on the helmet on the bench, and all that.
And quite frankly, Carter Verhaeghe deserves it because he's been stellar.
Yes,
I mentioned Conn Smythe earlier. Carter Verhaeghe is the leader in the clubhouse.
For that team, absolutely. I mean, there's a lot more to go before we really know.
I think he's out of all the players on any team, he's the most likely. If his team wins the cup, he's winning it. To me, he is the most ahead of the pack.
Yeah, I mean, the only other guy I can think of who's that far in the running is the guy who's sharing the points, right on pace points wise with him, which is McDavid.
That's fair,
but that's about it. I mean, other than that, I mean, unless we're talking about a goaltender, because
and Verhaeghe did it in one less game,
right? But unless we're talking about a goaltender, because Ottinger's been Dallas's best player, you can kind of make a case for Markstrom in Calgary because he's had a couple really strong games, stuff like that. But I go back to, there's a bunch of stuff really, because in Game 5, Giroux scored a goal that basically put the game away. That was just vintage Claude Giroux. The little head fake, I'm going to get the guy down. The puck didn't even go all the way in the net. It crossed over and a guy got his stick on it to knock it back out.
Yep.
But it didn't matter. My jaw was on the floor because I'm sitting there going, whoa, look at that move.
And then the setup.
Claude Giroux. Yeah, and when the setup was Carter Verhaeghe again. So,
yep.
Carter Verhaeghe only had a 5-point game that night, and the Florida Panthers only scored 5 goals. So you do the math, you know. But the next game, in Game 6, I mean, that whole third period, it was all about Claude Giroux. The goal that ties the game up, just unleashing one and it goes in. On second look, because at first I thought he just really uncorked one and just beat him.
Right.
It kind of leaked through a little more than it should have. That's kind of a bad goal by Samsonov, but hey, they happen. You got to take it. You know, if it happens, by all means. Now, you know what the best part of that goal really was, right?
Okay.
Because I actually tweeted it because, the gifts come around, right? All that stuff. Flat on camera, no question about it. Claude Giroux just gives you a "let's go, baby," right? Dude's fired up. You love to see it.
Full blown The Shift style.
Yes.
Yep.
Exactly.
Well,
and then keeps going. The setup for Barkov was a brilliant play, and then obviously he looks a pass to Verhaeghe in overtime, and just really sorry, but I thought the guy wasn't a great leader.
Right. He can't win with Giroux. Can't overdo it. What's he contributing? What's he doing?
The best part of that series, as much as Florida can't trail that often against Tampa Bay, the best part of that series for Florida is that your best players at most cases in the series were not Alexander Barkov and were not Jonathan Huberdeau. And they were okay. I'm not trying to say they were bad.
But the fact that those guys still have another gear to find?
Sure.
Yep.
The only issue for Florida that I will mention is you did have to, by the end of that game 6, Aaron Ekblad's taken a beating. And Sherratt's taken a beating. And that's going to wear thin when you're playing the 2-time defending Stanley Cup.
Because Tampa doesn't stop coming. It's waves.
Because there's no holes. There's just no holes in the system.
Let's get into that series because the Florida Panthers are going to need their players at as close to 100% as possible. They're going to need Huberdeau and Barkov to find that next gear.
What are we getting into? Are we going into the second?
We're going to Toronto, Tampa Bay.
Okay, we're talking Toronto.
Yeah,
cool.
Yeah,
because it was an interesting series. Now, when I made my prediction, by the way, from the previous series, I had Florida in 5, by the way, and I'll take Florida in 6.
Okay, I think I had Florida in 6, but
I mean, look, no big deal, no harm, no foul. Florida got there like they should. I didn't, if nothing else, I love the way they closed out because it was gut check time in a lot of those situations, and boy, did they step up. So
absolutely
good for them in that case, and good for them also for winning a playoff series for the first time since '96. I love stuff like that. I love stories like that. I think it's awesome for them. It's awesome to hear that their building has been pretty, I know we always make that joke about Florida and the amount of fans that are in the building and stuff like that, and everybody does, but they've been doing pretty good with the attendance in the playoffs.
Yeah, and it's going to step up as it goes, right? Like that's how it works.
Well, now you get now the thing is we'll get to the second round series, but we know who obviously won the other series that sets up the matchup. Now you got a battle of Florida.
Not a whole lot of travel.
Right. Like it's just, pretty simple stuff here.
Are Sunrise and Tampa close enough that they're going to be busing?
They could to get where they need to go. Like
they might practice in their home rink in the morning and bus over in the afternoon.
No, I don't see that happening. Only because it's okay. It would be too much to do that, but they won't need to go crazy with the travel stuff.
It'll be nice and easy for the players. No time zones, no blah blah blah.
Oh yeah. It's a Tampa-Toronto series.
Tampa-Toronto was also a really fun series.
So where I was trying to go with that was I had Toronto in 7.
Okay.
Which
I think I also had Toronto in 7. Game 7, I know we touched on it earlier about, Game 7s that feel like Game 7s.
Right.
I mean, you could hear a pin drop in that building, and that's not a knock on Toronto fans, for the record.
Right. So we just talked about like we've talked about this before. When for me anyway, if I say I think a series is going 7, it means I can see both teams winning. I knew this was a tough call, and I loved where the series was at 3-2 because I'm like, okay, Toronto had some magic going in that Game 5, and they had even the scary part is that it all lines up exactly the way that it looks when it's on your TV screen. They get to the third period of Game 6 with a lead.
I thought they were winning Game 6.
Well, no, I didn't think they were winning Game 6, but
I did.
But in the back of my mind, my thought process immediately goes to, well, we're about to find out what they're made of, because if they're going to put the demons behind them, they'll win this game. And they didn't win the game. No matter how you want to look at it, they didn't win the game.
Nikita Kucherov from Braden Point and Steven Stamkos on the power play. There's not really a whole lot you can do about that at that point.
5-on-3, no less, which means, good luck against that team. And then the overtime thing was just, it's overtime. What more can you say than that,
Yep.
It just is what it is. And it takes you to Game 7, and there was definitely a lot of nervous energy. Obviously, everybody's going to talk about the no-goal call in the middle of the game.
Here's the thing, though. It's interference. I called it live. I was stunned that they allowed play to continue live, and it turns out they didn't. They were just blowing the whistle, and the building was so loud because it was insane that no one could hear it.
It's because, look at who's doing what at that moment. John Tavares, who had 2 of the best games he had played in the series in Games 5 and 6, is
hard driving around the net.
And is cutting through the middle, and no one's there. He's got a clear path straight to the slot.
Probably because the guy covering him got full basketball picked. I'm surprised the guy didn't, cover his crotch like they do in the NBA.
Right. Steven Stamkos was making the call. Stamkos put his arm up.
It's interference.
Right. It is. And that's why he was so wide open. Look, and that's why one of the things I tweeted afterwards was, look, that's a hell of a shot by Tavares, because we can't deny what they were facing. They're facing Game 7 Vasilevsky.
Yep.
It takes that kind of shot to beat him. Good shot, but it was an obvious penalty.
Yeah, and then on the other side of the coin, by the way, Nick Paul became a Tampa Bay hero. He joins that list of guys who play in Tampa's depth that just come through in the most massive situations. 2 goals in Game 7. Had never had a playoff goal in his career before.
We had this conversation in the group chat. He's wearing number 20, I guess, for a reason, because he sure looks like the number 20 that was there last year.
Right.
I get such Blake Coleman vibes from him. It's not even funny.
You know how over the course of his career, Sidney Crosby has managed to transform every single guy on his wing into a 30-40 goal scorer?
Sure.
Tampa Bay does the same thing with bottom 6 guys.
Turns them into multimillionaires?
Right. Nick Paul's going to go make bank
he might
this offseason. He's either going to go make bank this offseason or he's going to re-sign with Tampa Bay and win rings in 2 of the next 4 years. Oh, man. Must be a tough decision, Nick.
It's obnoxious how well-run of an organization the Tampa Bay
It's really, honestly frustrating.
And the reason I say is because they are a team that, every trade deadline acquisition, because it's never anything big. It's usually these under the radar things. Who are the two guys they acquired this year? It's Nick Paul and it's Brandon Hagel. And they're all over the place. Their shifts are outstanding all the time. Like, everything about what they're doing works every single time. And and that's the problem with playing them is you don't get a chance to take I would say any moment off. Like, obviously you don't want to be off at any point in a game, but you can't afford a mistake at any point, no matter what.
Right.
Because even if it's not Stamkos, Kucherov, look, huge storyline going forward right now is whatever happens with Braden Point, because that did not look good. That injury looks awful. I hope it's not what I think it is.
Yeah.
I think, look, you know what I think it is. I don't need to spell it out for everybody, and I could literally probably spell it out because I'm sure it involves a few letters of the alphabet potentially. It just didn't look good. And which I got to add is a horrific shame because he's one of the most fun players in the league to watch.
And a big loss for them. Like, Braden Point is okay. There have been periods in Braden Point's career where he's been a top 5 center in the National Hockey League. I think this year he's probably more of a top 10 guy. He's still elite, still doing elite things, but not quite that special level he was last year and then even going back to the bubble. But Braden Point, make no mistakes, is a high-end center in the National Hockey League.
Oh, absolutely. And
okay.
Well, and look, nothing more says what playoff hockey is all about than the fact that despite how bad that looked, he came back out and tried to play again.
Yep.
It's just absurd. And we're going to, that's why I even said we're going to find out. And nothing, as far as I know, I just Googled it. Nothing came out today on what it is.
You're not going to hear anything specific about what it is. You're going to hear whether he's playing or not playing. It's that time of year. You're not going to hear anything unless they're shutting him down.
Well, that's what I mean.
Right.
Because that's where that's where my mind went. Are we going to find out that he's done for the year because it was that kind of knee injury?
Because he needs surgery. Right.
Right. Like, are they basically patching him up for next year already, or are they going to try to see if he can?
Honestly, with a player that young, you still got to be careful.
Right. You do. Absolutely, you do. But
okay.
I'm curious what happens.
Before we head over to the Metropolitan Division to talk about it, let's talk about this second round in the Atlantic. Tampa Bay against Florida. Mm-hmm. Who you got? I think it's a 7-game series. I'm going to say that off the rip.
I'm leaning that way too.
I'll go first, give you a second to kind of put something together. I think...
But you already told me who you think.
Well, right. I go in 7, and I think Florida's going to win it.
You do?
Well, no, I don't.
I would say you've been saying three-peat the whole
You're right.
show.
I have. Honestly, listen, I'm going to be honest with our listeners here. We're about an hour and a half into the show. I forgot about Braden Point when I talked about the three-peat thing.
Okay.
I forgot that his status was such a question mark. If he comes back, if he just tweaked something and has a day off and comes back at 100%, even if he misses game 1, comes back by game 2 or game 3 and is Braden Point, I think they still win the series. If Braden Point misses any sort of significant time,
right,
I think that swings the pendulum in the other direction. I think both of these teams are stellar. I think Florida was excellent in the first round. I think Tampa Bay was obviously excellent for pretty much the whole first round as well. I think this is a good series.
Here's my issue with the series, kind of both folks. I told you both teams gave me reason to not be convinced about them at all. Florida trailed too much in the first round against Washington. Can't afford to do it against Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay was very much there for the taking at multiple times in that series.
Toronto could have finished them. Yeah,
there were plenty of opportunities for that. And not even say that Florida could have, that Tampa or Toronto could have finished them. It's Toronto was in a position where you had first of all, Tampa had an awful game 1. So it just came out on a bad foot, even said we gave it away.
Yep.
And then they lost again in game 3, and you're going, okay, it's 2-1. And everything kind of evened itself out again when it was 2-2. But game 3, especially the way game 3 went down, because it was 2-0 Tampa Bay, and Toronto pulled off a comeback. And you went, okay, we're looking at that,
Yep.
Okay, Toronto's actually got something for this team. There's something shaky about this Tampa team right now. That Vasilevsky's giving up goals. This is not normal. What's happening? And so I look at Tampa Bay and I go, if you show any signs that there is an opportunity, it's only going to get tougher from here to withstand what another team can do to you when the door of opportunity opens, right? When the window of opportunity is open. In Florida's case, and this is really the big thing for me with them, if they want to win this series, you better take whatever you had in the third period of Game 5 and the third period of Game 6 and put it all together. Because if you're playing the way that you were in certain parts of the other games and in the other periods where it's just kind of blah and average looking and you don't look like you have the energy, I don't like your chances in this series, actually. I don't. I mean, at the end of the day, the thing that was most impressive about Tampa when it came down to it, especially in Game 7, was, once again, exactly the way it happened against Montreal, too. When you can close it out and you're at the point and you have the lead and all that stuff, they know exactly what they're doing. They are blocking a ton of shots. They are getting in the way of everything. They are tightening up on defense so much that there's no room to do anything.
They know how to close a series.
Toronto had a power play in that Game 7 where they couldn't get across the blue line because the wall just went up. And until you can even just break through the wall, you don't have a chance.
Yep.
Let alone anything else. So, good luck in this series to Florida. I'm kind of sitting in a spot where, look, I have Florida going pretty far in the playoffs. So I want to say Florida's the pick.
Okay.
But there's an element. There's an element of it to me where it's the heart saying Florida, the head saying Tampa.
Okay.
It's so tight. It's hard to pick one. I'm sticking with what I kind of said from the beginning in my own head. I'll pick Florida. But I am not in the least bit confident about it.
You're prepared to be wrong.
Oh, well, look, I said 7 because I always say 7 when I kind of feel like it's going either way.
I don't think any of these series are going to be easy to pick.
Well, and like I said, there's no doubt in my mind this is a long one because Florida will win games in this series. There's no way they don't. As a matter of fact, it was actually really nice to hear John Cooper say way after the fact with the first series, they get past Toronto, all that stuff, to get ready for the Florida series and go, you know what? That might have been the most entertaining playoff series last year. And He's not necessarily wrong. It was a really good series.
Yeah, for sure.
So, and let's not kid ourselves. Florida's way better than they were last year.
And I'll be honest, I think this is the worst of Tampa's 3 iterations, if you include the 2 cup-winning teams.
It's really funny because there are people that think that this is the best that they've ever looked, and I'm not sure that I'm convinced of that completely. I saw flaws, I saw things that weren't going perfect, and
I think you're seeing a lot of guys. I think you're seeing a lot of guys: Stamkos, Kucherov, Hedman, Vasilevsky, who have played a lot of hockey over the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah,
and a lot of minutes.
Sure.
And
it's just natural.
Stamkos has never been the most healthy. I'm sure he's walking wounded at this point. Kucherov's had some injury issues recently. Obviously missed all of last season. Blah blah, that whole thing.
At some point, we do have to eventually start to factor in that more guys are going to be dealing with more stuff.
Right. We're talking about 110 games a season.
Yes,
that adds up quick.
Well, and I specifically looking at the just looking at the first round in general, the fact that there were 5 series that went the distance. I mean, everybody's just playing a ton.
Oh, yeah. Teams are going to be out of gas by the time we hit the conference finals.
Well, which is why Colorado's sitting kind of pretty right now in the sense that, you know what? Sure, for Game 1, it's not the best thing in the world that you've been sitting around for a week. But certainly in the long run, it is.
moving from round 2 to round 3, after this next round concludes, I think we'll see a real advantage if anybody can manage to close their series in 5.
Early, yes.
Right. If, for example, Calgary smokes Edmonton 5 games. I think if Colorado slogs it out with St. Louis and plays a 7-game series, I think Calgary takes a massive advantage heading into that series.
Yeah, it's very possible. And who knows? I mean, we'll see. It's going to be
all right. Let's head to the the Metropolitan Division before we get out of here. We will go back to Rangers Penguins later because they are still battling it out in Game 7 here. Let's talk about Carolina Boston because this series probably had the most social media presence on it, the most kind of buzz around the series that didn't necessarily have too much to do with the hockey itself.
Right.
Brad Marchand was on form in this series just as a pest.
Sure.
He was at the top of his game.
You know what was actually kind of interesting about that, by the way? He did it without really crossing a line.
Right. Well,
he did it in a much more normal way than we've seen in the past.
And he finally smartened up and picked an unpopular target. He picked a guy that it's pretty easy to get the people on his side for. So if you've been listening to this show for a while, you know I like a little pro wrestling. And one of the easiest ways to turn babyface is just find a guy they hate more than you. It's pretty easy.
Yeah, you had a lot of people agreeing with Brad Marchand when it came to his target.
Well, right, exactly. And obviously Tony DeAngelo got the last laugh. They win the series. He plays some decent games down the stretch.
Well, and look, you got to factor it. Look, I cannot say enough about the fact that the guy put up points. You can't deny that.
Right.
That sheets say the guy contributed pretty much consistently every game.
Sure.
No doubt about it. One of the things about that series, because Boston got it tied in Game 4, got the series tied in Game 4. I thought DeAngelo that particular game was an absolute embarrassment.
Yeah, the throwing the stick on the breakaway
the
and
extra shots. I cannot believe that he did not get a 10-minute misconduct at the end of that game for doing.
He absolutely should have. Well, and then the quote after, well, he's going to score anyway. It's what do you want me to do? It sounds like Sid talking about. It sounds like Sid talking about flicking away Jake Voracek's glove to start that whole melee. Right? It's I don't. Come on, man.
Yeah, I don't like them.
Right? What am I supposed to do? Just skate away?
Right?
I didn't. Well, yeah, thanks.
Right. It's I thought that was awful, but.
Okay.
But
I'm not expecting maturity out of Tony DeAngelo.
Right.
Let's be quite frank about the subject.
I will say this about the series as a whole. I was really disappointed with the way that Carolina played their first potential closeout game. That was not very good on.
I agree.
And so much so that it kind of, by the third period and as things went along, became laughable that it was that convincing. They played so much better. Once the series was tied up again, they played so much better in Game 5 and Game 7 than they did in Game 6 when it was the first chance they had to close it out. That it just, there's a little cause for concern there with me, just because they've had series where they're dominant.
Sure.
This was not dominant.
No. It was also interesting.
To be fair, the fact that this one went 7 and we're looking at the other one that's in the 7th right now, there was, for a while, a legit possibility in my mind that the 2 lower seeds were going to make it.
I agree. And I picked Boston to win this series, and I thought I was going to get there. Turns out Game 7 was just a great hockey game, as most Game 7s are.
Well, and the fact of the matter is that, Marchand had a 5-point game and thrown in there and all stuff like that, but too many games, too many times, that trio that everybody looks to when it comes to the Boston Bruins just wasn't there. I mean,
I agree.
Too many times. I do want to throw out one footnote from the end of that series.
So would you say they were a little bit imperfect?
Probably.
Okay.
I would say. But so speaking of which, I want to throw out a little footnote from the end of that series because I don't know. I'm sure you've seen, like in hindsight, even if you didn't see it live, I'm sure you've seen it by now. The body language at the end of that game from the Boston side, and one player in particular, kind of tells me that something big could be happening that changes the course of the Boston Bruins for a little while.
Did I miss something here?
We were getting hug watch like crazy from Patrice Bergeron, and I'm telling you, the body language said, I don't know what my future holds.
Well, I hope that he decides to give it another go because honestly, Patrice Bergeron's one of those guys that throughout the
right.
I mentioned pro wrestling a little bit earlier. Even though the stable was a heel stable, right? Even though he was in the NWO and they were the bad guys, Patrice Bergeron was always pretty cool.
I mean, if that was really the end, I mean, we all know what the next destination is. It's the rafters in the TD Garden and a plaque in the Hall of Fame. Like, he's destined for all of that stuff because
and a front office job whenever Quebec gets a team back.
Maybe. I could see him, I think Boston's home.
He grew up a Nordiques fan. Come on.
I hear you, but I think Boston's home, and I think he's going to stay there. But I'm just telling you, the body language said quite possibly this might be it for Patrice Bergeron. And if it is, I'm with you. I think he's got maybe one more year because here's the reality of the situation, like just career-wise. He's sitting on, I'm not kidding when I say this, he is sitting on an even 400 goals in his career.
Wow.
You can't really get much better than that, but he is, I believe he's 19 shy of 1,000 points. I mean,
you might get him back.
I mean, if he plays another year.
He might just come back and refuse to shoot, just pass all season.
I hear you. I mean, if he came back for one more year, he's crossing the 1,000-point threshold. And does he need to do anything? He honestly doesn't need to do any more than he's already done because he's won a Stanley Cup. He's already a 4-time, quite possibly going to be 5-time Selke winner by the time this whole thing's over.
It's hard to get your number retired for an original 6 franchise, and I think Patrice Bergeron is pretty damn close to a shoo-in.
They might have a couple from that group because I wouldn't be surprised if another guy who might be retiring this offseason quite legitimately decides it's time and he gets his number up there too because
I can't. You're talking about 33, right?
Yeah, of course I am.
I don't know.
He was the captain of a cup team that broke a drought.
Okay, but for the original 6, 1 cup isn't good enough. It's a high bar.
They made 3 other finals while he was there.
Yeah.
Or 2 other finals while he was there, I mean.
And they would have won 1 if it wasn't for Tuukka Rask.
Oh, boy.
Okay.
I mean, let's put it this way. There's people who would probably make an argument that Tuukka Rask could get his number retired because he was that good, and I hear you, but he wasn't the cup-winning goal.
Yeah, I don't know if he meets that original 6 bar.
I think Chara's best years were, and Chara's another one who, whenever he decides to hang him up, yes, he does have an eventual future home in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, absolutely. All right, so I'll start with Pittsburgh because they're up here in this game. If Pittsburgh plays Carolina here, who you got?
I'm sorry, I'm laughing because you just said Pittsburgh's up in a game. The Rangers just tied it.
Did the Rangers score? Well, it's okay. Penguins were up most recently, so we'll start with them.
There's 5:45 left. The Rangers just scored.
Wow. So that game's probably going to overtime.
It very well could, which is
Game 7 overtime.
Which is just glorious.
Yeah, that's why we got to finish through these predictions so we can wrap and watch it.
I hear you. So here's the thing. Okay, so where were we at with this whole thing? I got a little distracted.
Carolina, Pittsburgh. Who you got?
We'll see. I don't know if it's Pittsburgh now for sure.
Well, no, but I'm saying we're starting with Pittsburgh. I'll ask you about the Rangers next.
I know. Carolina's the overall better team anyway, no matter who they play.
I mentioned earlier that if one of these teams gets through in 5 or 6 games, it gives them a pretty good advantage going into the conference finals. I think Carolina's that team. No matter who they play. And I'll say that for the Rangers too. I will take Carolina in no more than 6.
Okay. Here's where I'm at. I'm pretty sure I said these exact words on the last episode when we talked about the first round. That the Rangers were kind of my dark horse.
Okay.
Because I really think that they've kind of got some sort of quality to them.
Yeah, and Shesterkin is unreal.
And he's had a great game, no question about it.
He is unreal.
Here's the thing. They do look vulnerable, the Rangers do. Pittsburgh.
Certainly.
The thing with Pittsburgh, if they were to advance, is that Pittsburgh. There's just that element of them where it's like that team does not go down without a fight, and it's
one of those things. It's hard to bet against Sid and Gino. They're just those kinds of players.
It's absolutely impossible to do it, and every time you want to write that whole group off, they're right back there.
They fire a coach and win a cup. It's crazy.
And we had this discussion at the very beginning.
Yeah, no, Mike Sullivan ain't going anywhere.
No, but that's the interesting part. It's like they've had moments even this season where it's like something's not working, something's not there. They're like the worst of the teams that are going to make the playoffs out of the Metro. They consistently kind of were almost,
Yep.
Until until they did pass Washington. But the point being,
even for a lot of this series, they didn't have Tristan Jarry.
Yeah, at all.
Right. He just showed up tonight for Game 7.
Right. But so much so that, what really blew my mind about the series, and this is why that's the way that this team is not only did they not have Jarry for the entire series up until Game 7, they go in and they're starting with Casey DeSmith, and they're in the middle of overtime. It's double overtime, and he gets hurt. And now Louis Domingue is going to play.
Right.
Immediately. In double overtime. And they
ended up winning that game in triple overtime, by the way.
They didn't lose that game. How?
Insanity.
And it happened consistently. Louis Domingue technically won 3 games. That's crazy to me.
Crazy.
Now, there's been some weird stuff, from the Rangers side. The way they won Game 6 was just wild.
Yeah.
A goal like that is crazy. So God only knows what's going to happen moving forward with all these teams. Because, like I said, I kind of sense some vulnerability with Carolina. That makes me think that definitely Pittsburgh has a shot to exploit some of that stuff. The Rangers need a lot of help in terms of some of the big boys got to get going.
Oh, yeah. Mika Zibanejad just scored that tying goal there.
He had 2 in the last game, so maybe he's getting it going. But
he's getting it going.
You know who's not? Artemi Panarin has not been good in this series.
Well, but it's kind of like you said with
Florida. Florida without the 2.
Florida.
Because Huberdeau was nowhere near the best player on the team.
Exactly.
And it didn't have to be that way. Look, they're going to play. The thing that kind of worries me is that both of these teams offer up opportunities at will. The reason you're getting a back and forth Game 7 like we've seen right now is because they offer up opportunities.
Right.
Odd man rushes. There have been breakaways. There have been, I've been seeing all this stuff as we're talking. There have been all sorts of things like that.
They trust their goalie to have their back.
They do. Carolina plays tighter defense than this. So
Certainly.
Good luck creating opportunities when, and it's everybody. Carolina's taken they took a beating in that series.
Sure.
Because it was physical, it was tough, there was a lot of penalties going around, and you had guys dropping left and right for, maybe, I don't want to say missing a ship, but definitely being
damage was inflicted for sure.
Hobbled on the bench, needing some help getting there. Maybe Brady Shea had to get help to the bench during the one game, and it looked bad. He was fine in the end, but that kind of thing, right?
Right. It's the playoffs. Right.
Exactly. But regardless, it was that kind of series, and if they have that kind of defensive crew, and if every piece of it works, not just Brady Shea, who we clearly saw have an injury, at one point during the series, but Slavin and Pesci and that kind of that whole lineup of guys. D'Angelo's not as much of a defensive minded guy, but everybody's got to play their part.
Sure, and you're not going to be able to run and gun through Jacob Slavin and Brady Shea. You just don't.
So we'll see. Either way, it's going to be a tough one. I kind of get the sense that if it's Carolina-Pittsburgh, we're looking at 7.
I wouldn't mind it.
If it's Carolina-Rangers, that one, I like Carolina better than the Rangers. I kind of start leaning 6 there.
Okay. I think in a similar vein to how we talked about Barkov and Huberdeau not necessarily being the most effective for Florida, and the Rangers have kind of not had their big guys. Sebastian Aho had a little bit of a quiet series too.
At times.
At times, he didn't disappear, but he stepped into the background a little bit.
Yeah.
I think you'll see him step forward as we move on. And
who had a really strong series for Carolina that deserves a shout out here? Seth Jarvis had a really good series. I give him a ton of credit because he doesn't look his age.
No.
In a playoff series.
No, he looks like he belongs.
So here's the interesting part for me, and this will put a bow on everything because we've talked about every team that's left.
Yeah.
We're trying to do predictions for the second round here. I could pick any of the 5 teams that are left in the East, and you would not surprise me if any of them are there in the conference final.
No.
In the West, I tend to lean towards Colorado and somebody.
Okay.
So I feel more confident putting Colorado there with either Edmonton or Calgary, if that's what it is, or Edmonton, Dallas, whatever it turns into. I just can't get a feel on the East at all. I mean, I'm struggling because
it's wide open.
It's wide open. The problem is that in order to get into the dance, you needed 100 points in the standings and to be that good as a regular season team. So good luck joining the crowd. But the 8 that are there are, they're all right there right now. And I want to say that they're all right there because when I really look at it, Florida had a better regular season than everybody else did. Tampa is still the playoff champs until somebody steps in and changes that. They're better teams. You can do a tier ranking for what's better, but every single one of them played to some level where it was hey, something's not clicking completely. Something's not there, or something. And even in Tampa's case, you got to look at the fact that now you go, geez, maybe they lost one of their best forwards. Something's not going to be right with every single one of these teams, and it's going to be really interesting to watch. So. Except
maybe Colorado.
So anyway, I think we need to get out of here because we got a minute left in regulation in this.
Should
we talk long enough when we do the outro to get to the minute so we say okay, it's definite overtime here?
Yeah, sure. I'll mention something here before we leave. One of the things I love about playoff hockey is specifically how the format of overtime. I'm not talking about the 5-on-5, this 20-minute overtime, the sudden death. That's all great.
Right.
I like how it's presented on television. No commercial breaks.
Yeah.
Dry scrape at 10 minutes. It keeps the game moving. Yeah, and I love it.
I do. One of the things that was really interesting, because I was watching the Florida-Washington Game 6 with a buddy on Friday night, and he had told me at that point, because he we were watching a bunch of different stuff. We had multiple TVs going because one of the rooms where I'm at has multiple in it and stuff like that. We can stream one of the games. And he kind of told me, hey, we'll I'll hang through the first overtime, and if it goes any longer than that, I'm going to probably take off. Little did we know that the first overtime was going to last 3.5 minutes or whatever it was. It sometimes it just happens that quickly. You get these games the first game of the series, we're waiting to see if it goes to overtime in Game 7 here, where it went to overtime and then a second and then a third, and it drags on. We really didn't get many of those, to be honest, by the way.
No.
Couple of
Toronto, Tampa, that overtime went pretty late. But a lot of the rest of them were pretty early.
But it was late. The Colorado Nashville one that went to overtime didn't last. It lasted longer than I think a lot of people would have expected, but it didn't last terribly long.
No.
It wasn't within the first 5 minutes. We can safely say that, but it was, I think it was within 10. It was about 8 minutes in or something like that, I think is what it was.
Okay.
And I don't really recall many other overtime games. There wasn't an overtime game in the Carolina-Boston series.
No.
I believe this would be, outside of Game 1, this would be the first overtime game in the Ranger-Pittsburgh series, if that happens. Calgary-Dallas hasn't gone to overtime yet. Edmonton-LA had the one that lasted, what was it, 72 seconds?
Yeah, it was quick.
It was over before it started. St. Louis and Minnesota were all pretty lopsided.
Pretty lopsided. It wasn't the most interesting series, honestly.
Yeah, it kind of wasn't. So
it was always competitive, but it was just never.
Like that. And now we can officially say it, by the way. Game 7 of Rangers-Penguins is off to overtime.
Game 7 overtime, and you know what? That's a great place to leave you. We got 2 more weeks of high-quality hockey before our next show. In the meantime, make sure to follow us on Twitter at YWT Podcast. Follow Kevin at Kevin_Durso. Subscribe to the YouTube channel. You can find the show there as well as everywhere else you find your podcasts. Spotify, SportsTalkPhilly.com, all over the place, wherever you get your podcasts. And, man, I'm excited. 2 more weeks of just high-end hockey, and then things really start thinning out once we get to the conference final.
Yeah.
But the second round still has a lot of games on.
So I got to preface this by saying something here because, first of all, every team going to the second round is very dangerously close. I mean, there's a lot of good series that are on tap here. We've talked about a couple of them. We're going to know the final matchups after, maybe around midnight tonight. We'll see. I mean, Hopefully. It might not be. It might not be. You don't know. Could get overtime in that one too. We'll see. But oh no. Bad update from Dallas for one of your favorite players.
Oh, what happened?
Roope Hintz is out with an upper body injury tonight in Game 7.
Well, I'm picking Calgary. See ya.
Okay, well that's great. But no, one of the things I'm going to, because you're talking about watching these games and things like that. Next Saturday, we're not doing a show on Sunday, which works for me because I got a fully booked weekend of a bunch of crazy stuff going on. But next Saturday night, I'm going to be at quite literally a hockey party, if you will.
Nice.
With some of the people that my dad and I play fantasy hockey with. And I'll probably text the group a little bit with some stuff that's there because it's a pretty awesome setting to watch a game, and we're going to have a good time. And I don't know what games are going to be on. I actually I'd heard earlier today, and I'm a little surprised by this, that Florida-Tampa is starting on Tuesday potentially.
I heard it was probably Wednesday.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
See, I heard Tuesday at first and possibly Wednesday. It could get pushed to Wednesday depending on the results.
Yeah, I'm not sure. God forbid the NHL let us know.
No, because what I'm worried about by that announcement is that Monday could be an empty day.
Could be.
And I don't really want that. I mean, at the very least, they should give us Colorado, St. Louis tomorrow. But I guess they won't because they haven't even announced that series. So I don't, kind of hard to sit there and say, hey, by the way, tomorrow you're playing.
Right.
I guess we're getting Tuesday, Wednesday games. So I guess there might not be any hockey tomorrow, but we'll see.
Maybe not. But then after
that's the Monday news drop.
There you go.
We always are looking for the Monday news drop. It's that.
We'll get that.
We should get out of here before overtime starts. Now.
Yep, we'll get that, and then 2 more weeks of action, and we'll be back in 2 weeks to talk about it. So between now and then, we'll see you.